How do you deal with that as a family?
Well, we don't, in many respects, need to deal with it.
Nobody expected Prince Andrew to be the man who shattered the carefully controlled silence inside the royal gathering. Senior members of the family had assembled expecting a difficult but orderly discussion. Instead, Andrew turned directly toward King Charles, challenged his authority in front of everyone present, and forced decades of resentment into the open. Then Princess Anne moved. Her reaction was not cautious, diplomatic, or restrained. It was immediate, and everyone in the room understood why. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned only the people whose voices mattered: Anne, Prince William, Queen Camilla, Prince Edward, Sophie, and Andrew. The gathering was meant to settle whether his younger brother would keep attending private family occasions while remaining separated from official royal responsibility. That distinction mattered because official duty meant representing the crown in public, while private family contact belonged to personal life. Charles wanted those two worlds kept apart. Andrew wanted them brought closer again. Andrew did not ease into the argument. He accused Charles of letting William and senior advisors decide how he should be treated, then demanded that his brother reverse the restrictions around him. The king stayed still. He placed both hands on the table and told Andrew that responsibility for the monarchy could not be confused with affection between brothers. Charles spoke calmly, but the restraint only sharpened the tension. Andrew heard firmness where he had hoped to find sympathy. Anne could remain silent no longer. When Andrew said Charles had become too weak to make his own decisions, she pushed her chair back and cut across him. The Princess Royal told him that humiliating their brother before the family would not restore a single thing he had lost. William turned toward her, stunned by the force of it. Anne had heard this demand before, in private, and she suddenly understood that Andrew had chosen this audience deliberately. He was not merely venting, he was applying pressure. William watched Charles instead of joining the attack. The future king saw the real danger immediately. This was no longer just about Andrew's place. It was about whether a direct challenge to the monarch could stand unanswered inside his own family. Camilla remained close to Charles, while Edward and Sophie absorbed the growing fracture in silence. Andrew refused to retreat. He looked past Anne and fixed his attention on William. "Some people in this room have been waiting years to push me out," he said. The accusation changed everything. Anne had defended Charles, but Andrew had now dragged the next generation directly into the fight. Anne did not erupt simply because Andrew raised his voice. Her anger came from something older, heavier, and far more painful. Charles, Anne, and Andrew were not just senior royals locked in a bitter exchange. They were three siblings carrying years of rivalry, loyalty, and bruised memory into one room. The accusation thrown at William only sharpened the wound, because it turned a private family grievance into a direct challenge to the order Charles was trying to hold together. Charles felt that burden more than anyone. He had spent years trying to be both monarch and brother, and in that meeting those two roles collided without mercy. The crown, the monarchy as an institution, meaning the authority and responsibility of the royal office rather than personal feeling, demanded firmness. His place as Andrew's elder brother demanded compassion. When he lowered his eyes after Anne defended him, he did not look relieved. He looked tired, because he knew the argument was no longer about one decision. It was becoming a test of his reign itself. Anne saw the danger with brutal clarity. She had always measured royal life through duty, not entitlement, and that difference shaped everything she said. Duty, in her mind, meant accepting limits so the family could protect the monarchy from deeper harm. A documented account later shared by a palace aide confirmed that she had already warned relatives to stop pressing Charles over Andrew's future, because guilt was wearing him down behind closed doors. That was why her fury carried such force. She was protecting her brother from a pressure campaign dressed up as family concern. Andrew, meanwhile, felt cornered long before Anne cut across him. Seeing William seated close to Charles deepened his humiliation, because the future king seemed to occupy the space he once believed would always belong to him as a son of the house. An heir, the person next in line to the throne, expected to prepare for the monarchy's future, was now at the center of the conversation, and Andrew could feel his own relevance slipping. That is why he misread Anne so badly. He thought she had chosen William over him, when in truth, she was choosing stability over collapse. Edward broke the silence at the worst moment. He reminded the room of a family dinner weeks earlier, when Andrew had made nearly the same complaint, and Charles had gone cold. Anne heard that reference and understood at once. Edward had named the hidden trigger. Charles remembered it too, and Andrew knew they remembered. What looked sudden to outsiders had been building for weeks, ever since one reckless dinner turned resentment into a wound the family could no longer hide. Weeks before Anne pushed back her chair and confronted Andrew, there had been another room, another table, and another warning. That evening did not end with shouting. It ended with something far more dangerous: silence. Andrew asked Charles for one final restoration of his former place inside royal family life. Charles refused. Then Andrew said something about William that changed the atmosphere instantly. Anne heard every word, and from that night onward, she knew another confrontation was coming. Andrew chose a private family dinner at Windsor to make his demand. He wanted Charles to guarantee him a renewed place at family gatherings and ceremonial occasions, moments tied to royal tradition and public identity. Ceremonial occasions are formal events connected to the monarchy's public role, even when family members attend them personally. Andrew argued that enough time had passed. He believed his brother could restore dignity with one decision. Charles listened, set down his glass, and answered. Family contact could continue, but status could not be negotiated through pressure. Charles drew the line carefully, yet Andrew pushed straight across it. He accused William of shaping the king's judgment, and said Charles was already surrendering his judgment to the next reign. William was not present, but his name changed the mood, because the heir represented the monarchy that would follow Charles. Anne cut in at once. She told Andrew to stop using the future king as a weapon against their brother. Charles said little afterward. His silence carried more anger than a raised voice could. Anne followed Andrew after dinner and confronted him privately, with no advisors between them. She warned him never to drag William into a personal grievance again. Andrew fired back that she had always chosen duty over family, as though loyalty to the crown had erased loyalty to blood. The words landed hard. Anne did not answer immediately, and that pause told him he had wounded her. Andrew then made the promise that changed everything. He told Anne the matter would be raised again when everyone who matters is in the room. She understood what he meant. He intended to force Charles into a decision before senior royals, where silence could look like weakness, and resistance could look like rejection. Charles later spoke to Anne alone and admitted the deepest hurt. He would not bargain under pressure, but what troubled him most was Andrew's belief that affection should produce royal concessions. Weeks later, when the challenge finally came, Anne remembered that warning word for word. This time she would not take Andrew aside afterward. He had chosen his audience deliberately, and she intended to answer him before the same people he hoped would pressure Charles. Anne had spent years being the sibling who rarely wasted words. That was precisely why the room changed when she stood. Andrew had challenged the king, questioned William's influence, and implied that Charles lacked the strength to control his own reign. Anne had heard enough. What followed was not a ceremonial reprimand or polished royal correction. It was one sister confronting one brother with the accumulated frustration of a family that had repeatedly refused to say everything aloud. Andrew refused to soften his position. He insisted that he had every right to challenge decisions affecting his own life, and demanded to know why Charles expected family loyalty, while denying him the dignity he believed belonged to the king's brother. Anne answered without hesitation. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter and representing a senior working member of the royal family, told him that being Charles's brother guaranteed a relationship, not influence over the crown. Andrew heard the distinction, but he did not accept it. Anne stepped away from her chair and faced him directly. She asked whether he understood what he had just done to Charles by challenging him before the entire family. Andrew did not retreat. He said the king had created the situation himself by refusing to stand beside him. Anne stared at him in disbelief. Her anger changed then. It became something colder, because she realized he was no longer simply defending himself. He was placing responsibility for his pain onto the brother who had spent years trying to contain it. Charles finally interrupted. He told Anne she did not need to defend him, but she turned toward him and answered that this had gone beyond defense. She would not stand by while family loyalty became a weapon used against the monarch. The word mattered. A monarch is the reigning sovereign, the person carrying final constitutional and symbolic responsibility for the crown. Charles understood exactly what she meant, and Andrew understood it too. Andrew shifted his attention toward William. He accused the prince of wanting him permanently pushed aside. William remained composed and told him that he had asked only for consistent boundaries, not revenge. That calm answer infuriated Andrew more than shouting could have. Camilla then broke her silence. She told him quietly that Charles had defended his private place inside the family more often than he realized. Andrew froze. The brother he had accused of abandonment may, in fact, have protected him repeatedly. Charles raised one hand. Everyone stopped. He told them to sit down, and made clear that he would now speak without interruption. Anne's eruption had broken the tension, but the king's next words would decide whether her defense preserved the family bond or closed the door on Andrew more firmly than ever. For most of the argument, Charles had allowed everyone else to reveal themselves. Andrew revealed resentment. Anne revealed fury. William revealed restraint. But when the king finally spoke at length, the room understood that he had not been passive. He had been listening. Charles was now faced with the most painful kind of royal decision, one in which authority could protect the monarchy only by disappointing his own brother. And this time he refused to soften the consequences simply to preserve temporary peace. Charles looked directly at Andrew and made the boundary unmistakable. Decisions about royal status, formal participation, and access to the working life of the monarchy rested with the sovereign, not with family pressure. The sovereign is the reigning monarch who carries final responsibility for the crown's official direction. He acknowledged discussing the future with William, because the heir would one day inherit that responsibility, but he rejected the accusation that the prince was controlling him. The decision, Charles said, was his. Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the papers in front of him. His voice dropped. He told Andrew that he wished they could meet as brothers without every conversation turning into a negotiation over status, visibility, or privilege. Anne felt her anger soften because she heard exhaustion beneath the authority. Andrew seemed ready to interrupt, but the king continued. The boundaries already established would remain. There would be no reversal simply because the disagreement had become painful. Andrew finally understood that Charles meant every word. Shock replaced defiance, and for a moment he said nothing. The king then disclosed, in that private family conversation, that several personal accommodations had remained only because he wanted his younger brother treated with dignity inside the family. Those gestures had never promised institutional rehabilitation, meaning a formal return to official royal duties or public standing. Charles had protected a private relationship while refusing to rebuild a public role. Andrew had mistaken one for the other. Anne watched the distinction land with brutal force. She had urged Charles privately to separate compassion from concession, yet hearing him do it aloud made the cost feel heavier. Andrew might understand the logic, but she knew he could still experience it as betrayal. William remained quiet, refusing to turn the moment into victory. Andrew leaned back and looked from Charles to Anne, then toward William. His anger returned, colder now. "So, this is what all of you wanted?" he asked. The decision was settled, but that question changed the danger. Andrew was no longer challenging only the king's judgment. He was testing the family's loyalty, and the fallout was about to become deeply personal for them all. The loudest part of the confrontation ended with no dramatic exit and no final shout. Instead, the room became painfully quiet. That silence carried more weight than the argument itself. Andrew had been denied the reversal he demanded. Charles had asserted his authority. Anne had said publicly what others had avoided saying privately. Yet nobody looked relieved. The decision had restored order to the monarchy while exposing just how fragile the relationships behind that order had become. Charles ended the meeting with a few controlled words and asked everyone to leave the decision where it stood. Edward rose first, with Sophie close beside him, and both understood that remaining would only deepen the strain. William stayed behind. The prince wanted a few moments with his father because the ruling had protected institutional stability, but it had also wounded a brother. Andrew pushed his chair carefully back into place and moved toward the door without looking at William. No apology came. No gesture of reconciliation followed. Anne called Andrew's name before he reached the doorway. He stopped, then turned toward her with an expression she had not expected. The fury had gone. What remained was hurt. He asked whether she had ever really intended to understand his position, or whether she had decided long ago that his feelings no longer mattered. Anne did not answer immediately. She had confronted him to protect Charles, but now she could feel the personal cost of every word she had thrown across that table. Andrew saw her hesitation, and somehow that silence hurt them both more. Charles remained behind after his younger brother left. He lowered himself into the chair again and rubbed his forehead, the authority of the previous minutes giving way to exhaustion. William stayed close. The king told him that the hardest decisions were often the ones in which nobody walked away feeling victorious. That mattered because royal authority can settle a formal dispute, but it cannot command affection or repair trust. Charles had won the argument and still looked as though he had lost something. William refused to celebrate the outcome. He told his father that he had never wanted Andrew humiliated. He wanted boundaries that did not shift whenever guilt or anger entered the room. Charles listened carefully, recognizing that the crisis was already shaping how the future king understood leadership. William had seen what happened when private emotion collided with public responsibility, and he would remember it. Anne made her choice before anyone could stop her. Instead of staying with Charles, she followed Andrew and found him alone before he left the residence. Minutes earlier, she had challenged him before the family. Now she would face her brother without an audience, without ceremony, and without the crown standing between them. Without Charles, William, courtiers, or senior royals watching, Anne's anger changed shape. She found Andrew alone, still carrying the humiliation of the meeting. This time there was no table between them, and no audience. What began with silence became the most honest conversation. Anne did not withdraw what she had said. Andrew did not pretend he had been misunderstood. But beneath their hostility sat something neither had admitted: fear of losing family completely. Anne reached him before he could leave and asked for 5 minutes alone. Andrew refused at first, still wounded by the way she had challenged him. Then he stopped and agreed on one condition: no lecture about duty. Anne accepted. She told him she was speaking as his sister, not as the Princess Royal. That title, reserved for the sovereign's eldest daughter and carrying senior royal responsibilities, had defined much of her public life. For these few minutes, she wanted it left outside the conversation. Andrew finally said what anger had hidden. Losing public position had hurt, but feeling increasingly unnecessary inside his own family had hurt more. He believed challenging Charles before relatives was the only way to make that pain impossible to ignore. Anne listened without interrupting. She understood the loneliness, but she did not excuse the attack. He had turned private hurt into public pressure, forcing Charles to answer as king when Andrew wanted him to respond as a brother. Anne then admitted her own fear. Watching Charles carry repeated pressure frightened her, because none could fully share his burden. Her eruption had looked like fury, but underneath it was protectiveness. She told Andrew that William had not created the consequences he resented. The future king had become an easy target, because blaming him was simpler than accepting how much royal life had changed. Andrew went silent. Then he conceded the point. He admitted that directing resentment toward William had spared him from facing a harder truth. The old position he wanted back was not waiting for him. Anne did not soften the reality. Charles's decision would stand. Royal status would not return because the family still cared. Anne gave him something different. She told Andrew that losing an institutional role did not require losing every personal bond. Family belonging could survive even when royal authority remained closed to him. Andrew did not ask for another meeting. He promised he would not challenge Charles again that evening, and said he would speak to his brother privately once emotions cooled. Anne could not restore his old life, but she had finally reached the man beneath the resentment. And soon the outside world would learn that something extraordinary had happened behind palace doors. By the next morning, a confrontation that had begun behind closed doors had escaped into public conversation. Nobody outside the gathering had heard every sentence, yet the central image was powerful enough to dominate attention. Princess Anne, standing against her younger brother after he challenged the king. The story was no longer simply about Andrew's frustration. It became a national argument about loyalty, consequences, family, and whether royal blood should ever be allowed to weaken the boundaries surrounding the crown. Charles faced the coverage in silence. The palace declined to give a detailed account of the family meeting, choosing instead to protect the privacy of those involved, but that restraint only sharpened public curiosity. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main official London residence and administrative center, suddenly became the focus of intense attention. Commentators split into two camps. Some saw a painful sibling dispute, while others saw proof that Charles would not let private pressure dictate royal authority. Charles read the morning summaries over breakfast, then folded the paper before reaching the end. Camilla noticed immediately. She told him that refusing to defend himself publicly might actually protect Andrew more than any statement could. The king understood the point, but it offered little comfort. He had wanted the argument contained within the family. Now millions were discussing the emotional cost of a decision he had hoped would remain private. Anne reacted differently. She hated being treated like the victorious disciplinarian who had finally put Andrew in his place. The Princess Royal knew the reality was far less satisfying. She had defended Charles, but she had also wounded her younger brother deeply. Andrew remained silent in public, while she understood that silence could easily be mistaken for defeat rather than hurt. Outside Buckingham Palace, the argument acquired a public symbol. A small crowd gathered near the gates as television crews delivered live reports, and one newspaper carried a photograph of Anne beside Charles beneath the headline, "The King's Line Holds." The phrase captured the mood with brutal simplicity. Authority had survived, but family unity looked bruised. William refused to add fuel to the reaction. The prince declined to answer Andrew's accusation publicly, because doing so would only reinforce the claim that he had driven the decision. His silence supported Charles instead. The future king allowed responsibility to remain exactly where his father had placed it. Charles finally accepted that silence alone could not repair the private wound. When Andrew asked for a one-to-one conversation, the king agreed. The public saw a monarchy closing ranks, but behind palace doors, two brothers still had one final exchange ahead, and its outcome would decide what the confrontation truly meant. The crisis did not end with Andrew regaining what he demanded. It did not end with Anne apologizing for defending Charles, or with the king reversing his decision to restore family harmony. It ended with something harder and more permanent: acceptance. Each person had been forced to confront the difference between love and entitlement, between forgiveness and restoration, between belonging to a family and holding a place within the crown. For Charles, Anne, and Andrew, that distinction changed everything. Charles met Andrew privately after the public noise had begun to fade. No senior royals stood between them now, and neither brother could hide behind the tension of the earlier gathering. Andrew admitted that challenging the king before the family had turned personal hurt into an attack on royal authority. Royal authority simply meant the monarch's power and responsibility to make decisions for the institution. He did not deny his anger, but he accepted that forcing Charles into a public confrontation had been wrong. Charles answered with the clarity Andrew had resisted from the beginning. The restrictions would remain. There would be no return to his former royal standing simply because they shared blood. Yet the king also promised that his younger brother would not be erased from private family life. Andrew finally understood the difference. He could remain a brother without reclaiming the public role he had lost, and accepting that truth was painful precisely because it was final. Anne found Andrew again later, and spoke without the fury that had defined their earlier clash. She told him she did not regret stopping his attack on Charles, but she regretted allowing anger to make him feel abandoned. Andrew surprised her by admitting that she had been the one person willing to tell him the truth directly. Anne had wounded him, but she had also broken through the resentment that everyone else had been trying to manage. Charles came to understand her eruption differently as well. Anne had not merely defended a monarch. She had protected an exhausted older brother who could no longer let affection override responsibility. William saw the lesson clearly. The future king understood that monarchy survives not because families avoid painful conflict, but because emotion cannot rewrite institutional boundaries whenever pressure becomes unbearable. The confrontation had begun with Andrew demanding his old place back, and Anne rising in fury. It ended with Charles secure in his decision, Andrew accepting the limits of his future, and their sister proving that loyalty can sometimes require painful truth. Blood preserved the bond, but duty defined the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.